third season of The Revival was a huge change to the format, that being established since the beginning of the show 2 years ago due to the heartbreaking departures of the Daleks last season. In this season we had Freema Agyeman debut as the new companion Martha Jones. This casting was a huge deal when announced, with Martha being the first ethnic minority companion of Doctor Who, whether you want to count Mickey as an official companion or not. There are instances throughout the season, depending on the time periods that they are in, that they explore historical issues concerning race, but before we go through all 13 episodes, I want to cover the Runaway Bride. I purposely didn't put it in the series 2 review because we already had the Christmas invasion, so I'm just going to put it here. So, the Runaway Bride, a better Christmas special that starts the popular format of the RTD Christmas specials moving forward, with the guest stars, the first being Catherine Tate playing the role of Donna Noble, soon to be Bennett, as we discover how she arrived on the TARDIS despite it being in orbit. Donna's character in the story was alright, but could be quite irritating at times, and the return of the Killer Santas and Christmas tree from the previous special felt a little cheap, even though they did try to attempt to elaborate more on them. Although the Empress of the Rachnos serving as the main antagonist was a brilliant villain, with the design looking quite excellent, especially for 2006. Lance, Donna's soon-to-be husband's betrayal towards was heartbreaking, especially when we find that he was the one drugging up human particles that accidentally locked onto the TARDIS, and that he'd actually been working with the Rachnos. The brutal disrespect and belittlement he gave to her about how he essentially had to put up with her until now was incredibly heartbreaking for Donna. The Doctor's grief he has for Rose during the special was quite sad too, during the wedding reception when he sees a couple similar to the pair as they fall into each other's arms, and I loved the awkward silence he had when Donna picked up Rose's jacket during her abduction rant. The Doctor flooding the Thames, drowning the Rachnos' children in a fit of rage with no Rose to show him the right morality, as Donna then luckily gets him to stop, was quite dark, as the Rachnos then escapes back to his ship to avenge her babies before Unit steps in with orders from a mysterious source named Saxon, who orders the destruction of the Rachnos ship. The ending was quite nice, with Donna surprisingly declining the opportunity to travel with the Doctor. But when we see her again, it would show that she later would regret that decision. Donna's decline being down to witnessing the darkness that is carried when travelling with the Doctor was really good, and just shows from that single adventure that despite whatever happens, darkness will forever be in the Doctor's shadow. No pun intended there. Donna, before taking off, asking the name of the woman that the Doctor kept referring to as his friend, meaning Rose, was incredibly sweet. The story is such a brilliant sense of fresh air after spending 2 seasons with the Tylers, and it was great to see an entirely different character. The beginning of the episode establishing trainee Dr. Martha Jones, played brilliantly by Freema Agyeman, who must have had an incredible amount of pressure up to expectations that Rose had left with fans, and establishing Martha's family at the beginning of the story was a great way to show a glimpse into these characters, and the theme for Martha was brilliantly composed by Murray Gold, and the inclusion of that during the scenes of Martha's slow discovery into the world of Doctor Who was great. The hospital being taken to the moon was very interesting, especially when we find that it's brute alien police force, the Judoon, that have taken them there to risk them breaking the law. The introduction of the Judoon was great for the Doctor Who world, as it gives that sense of law and order in the galaxy. The Plasma Maw, the alien the Judoon are after, was a good villain, with the blood sucking to congest the blood of people, which will hide their alien identity from the Judoon scan. And I love the Doctor's trickery as she gets her to purposely drink his own blood, which will then have the Judoon detect her as the alien anomaly. And I love that it's Martha that makes the Judoon check again, as she essentially saved the day. The Doctor coming back for Martha after a night of the family attempting to act civil amongst each other that just goes horribly wrong was interesting, as they escape from a stressful family life, as she's the glue that holds them together, which makes her wish to travel with the Doctor was great, although that's something that will lead to massive consequences for Martha as the series goes on. Her reaction to the TARDIS was supplied by a beautiful theme, honestly just felt like a lovely sense of fresh air, although the slight hostility shown by the Doctor towards Martha for apparently trying to replace Rose was stupid, as it was clear that that wasn't her intention. The hostility continuing, saying that she gets one trip and then back home, felt a little mean, but the name drop of the story's title at the end as the two cling onto the console was a sweet way to end the story. This story is quite underrated, as it's an enjoyable watch for me. Martha's first trip back in time again was a great sense of fresh air, and the little flirting Shakespeare has with Martha with Martha hilariously declining him due to his poor hygiene was great. The Carey Knights are interesting villains that work well with the setting of the story, which is 1599 the Globe Theatre, and serve to be quite threatening with their witchcraft magic, like brutally killing Linley via submerging a voodoo doll of him into water, and even successfully shutting off one of the Doctor's hearts. Although the story's flaw is that it's the second episode of the new series, and yet they still wish to go on a road. Like, there's a positive way of going about her, like when Lilith was attempting to use the pain of losing Rose against the Doctor, as we then find that her name is actually what keeps Ten strong and still fighting. And then you have him going on about how Rose would know what to do with Martha being sat right there as Martha's rightly disgruntled, which is why I don't exactly find the story entirely enjoyable. The ending showing Elizabeth II being angered at the Doctor demanding off with his head was quite humorous, especially because the Doctor doesn't know what he's done and because he hasn't done it yet. This confrontation is most likely due to the events in the 50th anniversary Day of the Doctor. The story's issue with the annoying mention of Rose continues here, as we have the Doctor taking Martha to New Earth, the same planet he took Rose last season, although the return of the setting was inevitable after Bo's message last season, as this story plays as the final instalment in the trilogy of New Earth. The initial annoyance shown rightfully by Martha when being taken to the same planet as Rose was good. The Doctor and Martha do improve better here, with Martha being kidnapped in order so she'll appear as a third passenger, which will make friendly couple Sheen and Martha move into a quicker section of this never-ending motorway. The return of the Face and Bo, no same from last season, was great, especially because Bo leaves us with a massive foreshadow to the series arc that 10, like last season, just dismisses. I love how Martha is inquisitive about the Doctor and asks if they could go together after the Doctor's vivid description of his world without actually telling her that it's no more. The story then ends with Martha confronting the Doctor about Bo's final words regarding that the Doctor isn't alone. He tells Martha that he lied and he tells her of the time. During speaking of the planet, there is some singing heard in the background as he then tells her of some beautiful description of the fallen Gallifrey, which ends the episode. There wasn't exactly a prominent antagonist in this other than an interesting and underrated return of the Macra who haven't been seen since the 1960s, which is very underplayed. This is an underrated Dalek story that sets up some arc for the Daleks that are now on the verge of extinction, as the Kulaskara from the last season now seeks survival from humanity itself and create a human/Dalek hybrid, something the Daleks regret later on in the series. The pig slaves, whilst design-wise they look really horrific, they were merely there to present the Daleks' past failed experiments and mainly manhandle the humans because the Daleks obviously can't. Solomon, Delula, Frank and Laszlo were alright side characters, with Solomon interestingly attempted to open up to the Daleks and make them see emotion, which was incredibly powerful, and it were quite cold then as they then just gun him down. Daleks hybrid, Mr. Deragarus hybrid, was a great addition to the story, with him being a Dalek of compassion. Sek hybrid wishes to implement his own compassion to the human Daleks, much to their dismay, which was rather interesting as they later used them, until the Doctor got involved within their arising, which gave the hybrid the Doctor's independence, to where the Daleks get so bitter that they then just slaughter them and the Sek hybrid so brutally. Laszlo, being a failed pig slave, begins to die due to the short duration of the half-human, half-pig experiments. The Doctor, having witnessed so many deaths in this serial, makes him so determined to save Laszlo, to which he succeeds, which I found to be a great defining moment for the 10th Doctor. Despite the Doctor saving Laszlo, the end of the story has the Doctor feeling defeated after he felt like he just let Dalek Khan escape, which was a pretty good ending. The Doctor taking Martha back home the day after he whisked her away, making the past 4 stories take place merely just a night, was great, but quite sad that the Doctor was just going to dump Martha back home, although the Doctor returns seconds later after Martha informs him of the Lazarus Experiment, which just presents the Doctor's urge to investigate. The Doctor meeting Martha's family, to where he doesn't hit it off well with Francine. Martha's mum was hilarious because Ten begins to realise his unpleasant interactions with the mum. Professor Lazarus is quite an interesting villain, being that of an old man who wishes to live forever, and that it was the machine that did that, but later backfired and made him create life energy out of people in order to appear still younger. The Doctor playing the organ to its highest frequency, which makes the now mutilated Lazarus fall to his death to save Martha and her sister Tish, was pretty good. The Doctor finally taking Martha on as a companion was sweet, especially since she had a lot to deserve that more than Rose. This mysterious man throughout the second half of the episode telling Francine about the Doctor was quite chilling, especially because he lets known the dangers when being around him, which makes her forbid Martha from being with him, and yet she dismisses this. The episode is a very ambitious and tense episodes in the Siege story, with that being a tense countdown of 42 minutes until the ship heads towards the sun, with the countdown being shown prominently throughout the episode. Martha relying on her mum at home for a question that needed to be right, or neither Martha or Riley would be able to continue on in preventing the ship's course to the sun. Martha and Riley being sent into the sun via an escape pod that they get into by accident was quite sad, especially due to Martha's emotional phone call to her mum. This scene was beautifully written by Chris Chibnall of all people, which I'm surprised we haven't seen yet in his run. The sun itself being the antagonist was brilliant, especially since it sets out its anger and revenge on the crew after they mines its heart out, and stays inside of the Doctor until the crew releases the sun's mined out particles, which was quite brutal for the Doctor, with David Tennant truly nailing how excruciating it would be, to that of the sun literally destroying his body that much that he was getting to the point of a near regeneration. Martha, after 7 episodes, finally receiving her TARDIS key was such a sweet ending, but foreshadows how much she'll need to step up massively in the final 4 stories. The story begins already quite tense, with Martha and the Doctor being up against someone that dangerous of a threat that he has no other choice but to change his literal biological TARDIS to become human. Tennant again nails Ten's transformation into a human, which looked extremely painful. The essence of the Doctor being kept within the fob watch of John Smith throughout the serial was great. John Smith, who is the human identity of the Doctor, was amazing. I love that essentially he's an ordinary man, and when faced with the conclusion that he's just an alternative identity and that he must die to change back, made to be a heartbreaking performance given to by Tennant again. The 10th Doctor is definitely shown to be his most alien here, especially as he underestimates the fact that when he turns human he'll fall in love, putting Martha in an extremely tricky situation when John falls in love with John Redfern. Martha has a lot to do in this story and just proves why she's such a great companion and far more superior than Roz. Martha must protect the vulnerable Doctor, who is unknown to the fact that the family of Blood now know of their whereabouts. The family are some great one-off villains, especially due to the fact that they take advantage of the bodies that they steal, including Daughter of Mine, who acts far more menacing than her visible appearance. Mother of Mine also attempts to use Ginny's scream to mentally mess with Martha to have her put the gun down, which was both brilliantly dark. The undertoning theme of racism towards Martha, because of the time that the TARDIS has allocated them in, was very mature and shows how strong Martha is as a character to be firing back at those racist people. John Redfern is also a sympathetic character that also falls victim to the Doctor's quite selfish and empathetic actions, and I love that the Doctor thinks that just because he can act like John because of his appearance, John would take him back, to where she then says that John and him are different, and rather says that if he didn't pick this place there'd be no bloodshed, presenting that death and destruction follows the Doctor. Timothy is also a great side character, and that despite the actor's younger age, he is very much one of the better child actors to work on the show. Timothy keeping hold of the watch until the Doctor told him when it was time was great, and I love how it later saved him in World War I a year later, and the ending where the Doctor and Martha visit him at the Memorial for Remembrance Day of 2007, 93 years later, made to be such a respectful and sweet ending. This story is very much an overrated story amongst the fandom, but whilst being overrated, it's still a great story for me. The Weeping Angels are great and quite interesting villains. At this point in their first appearance, the Angels are very much unknown and silent throughout the story, bringing this story to be very much an atmospheric thriller. This story is followed by a one-off character, Sally Sparrow, and her friend's brother Larry, working together to find out the disappearances of several people, including Larry's sister Kathy, who had been sent 60 years back in time by the Angels. The story literally uses time travel to their advantage, as when Kathy's grandson gives Sally a letter, it also presents how Moffat literally is showing how Kathy's life flashed before us and Sally's eyes. Billy's also a lovable side character who, like Kathy, falls victim to the Angels, sending him back in time, although Sally later sees him, who's now old, in a hospital bed one last time before he dies. The Doctor's use of the Doctor and Martha showed to be quite effective, as like the previous two, they are also trapped in time and have left VHS tapes years later for Sally and Larry to interact with them. Tim very much knowing what Sally and Larry are going to say because of a transcript he was given of the conversation was quite clever, especially when we find it was given to him by Sally, who traps the Angels in a quantum lock, trapping them forever as they all are forever stuck looking at each other. Sally gave the transcript and other information that she has had during the investigation to the Doctor, who in his timeline is to await the events of the story and is given the resources, as that will very much help him when he and Martha are trapped later on. The story is very much cleverly written by Moffat, and it's a lot to wrap your head around, especially when bloody scripting it. but it's very satisfying when it all makes sense at the end of the story. The replaying of Ten's dark blink warning as the camera cuts to statues, showing that there may be one more than the 4 that were shown in the story, which presents that the angels aren't exactly over yet. The story's theme of the end very much hypes up the end of the season, but also the conclusion of the series arc set by the face of boy in episode 3. We also see the return of Jack Harkness, which was great, especially since within his timeline it works so nicely in between the first and second season of his own spin-off show Torchwood. It also answers the definite question behind his immortality that Jack had been wondering during his venture to find the Doctor, which had taken him centuries after being originally abandoned by his Ninth Doctor at the end of the first season. The new trio consisting of the Doctor, Martha and Jack was honestly a nice TARDIS team as they bounce off each other brilliantly. The antagonists of the story being the future kind felt a little pointless, especially since I felt like they were there mainly just to move the plot along and mess stuff up, which would lead to the Doctor's more prominent involvement. Derek Jacobi is amazing in this story as Professor Yana, and the revelation of the series arc being that Yana is pretty much an acronym of Bo's final words to the Doctor works so effectively in the final 10 minutes of the story. Yana opening the fob watch to reveal the hidden essence of the Master was brilliant as he brutally kills Chandler, although he does get his comeuppance as she shoots him back before then succumbing to her death. The ending with the newly regenerated Master taking the TARDIS and leaving Ten, Martha and Jack stranded at the end of the universe with the future kind trying to get into the room they're in was great, and the face that the Doctor leaves us with, that of disbelief, especially since he knows he's no longer the last of the Time Lords and he's just lost for words, definitely worked well to resemble the audience's reaction at home. The cold opener of the finale shows us that the Master is now disguising as the nation's Prime Minister Harold Saxon, which was brilliant, with that of the first impression of Sim's incarnation of the Master is that he's very much mentally unhinged, especially because he's now only coming to terms with the traumatic effects after his brief involvement with the Time Lords. Since the Master not being able to handle the war, that's why he ran and hid as Professor Yana. We also see the revelation of his initiation into Gallifreyan society when he had to stare into the time vortex, and how after that it gave him this drumbeat of thought that has incited within him throughout his life. The Master's experience during the Time War and the day of his initiation is an interesting add of character, but perhaps was RTD's way of humanising the Master, like he very much humanised the 10th Doctor, still presenting the recurrent alien side of him. The Archangel Network is an interesting concept, especially since it explains as to how the Master had Earth under his manipulative ways in over just a year during the Doctor and Martha being off world. Part 1 presents that though there are some people who slip through the manipulation, like Vivian Rock, who attempts to show Lucy, the Master's wife, that he isn't who he says he is, although she knows this and is with him for an ulterior motive that we find out at the end of Part 1. The trio having no choice but to lay low as the Master makes them all nation criminals was great, and I love during Martha and Jack asking about who the Master is to the Doctor. Martha initially brings up if he is his brother, especially since there were plans to actually make the Master and the Doctor siblings in a planned finale for the classic series season 11 jump out to his final season, but the untimely death of Roger Delgado stopped this from ever happening. The Doctor's brief reminiscing of his childhood on Gallifrey and he and the Master's day of initiation looking into the untempted schism, something that is claimed to give the Time Lords some inspiration for the wonders of time and space, and that they're a collective that couldn't handle this and run, that being the Doctor, was such a brilliant scene, especially because of this new reimagining of Gallifrey in the revival. The trio sneaking into the Master's global unveiling of the toggle fin as they use perspection filters, the same thing used in the fob watches that make people not wish to take a second look at them, was great. Jack suggesting a more logical way of stopping the Master and using the key to go break his neck, only for the Doctor to humorously reply with, "Now that sounds like Torchwood," brilliantly implies the contrast between the Doctor and Torchwood and how the spin-off is more dull, and the fact that they do kill aliens on the show. The Part 1 now presents the Master's ulterior motive and now presents the toggle fin to the world, and how they brutally then killed the US leader live in front of everyone. Part 1 ends quite curtly with Voodoo Child playing as the paradox powered by the TARDIS opens up to millions of Toglafane who go to slaughter millions on Earth down below. After being whispered words by the now visibly older Doctor, Martha is transported down to Earth as she witnesses the destruction of it in front of her very own eyes as she makes it a mission to return back. Part 2 is set a year later after the previous one, as it presents how Martha has been on a year-long journey around the world. Earth is at risk of extinction because of the Master's reign on Earth a year prior and its decrease of population due to the massacre driven by the toggle effect. Whilst the Master's dancing and singing along to I Can't Decide was a little silly, I love how this displays how the Doctor has literally been treated like the underdog, which could express how the Master has felt regarding the relationship between him and the Doctor after all these years. Martha, along with Tom and Miss Doherty, discovers after dissecting the Toglophane sphere that the creature inside are all people from Utopia, and that Utopia was nothing like it were made out to be, and it were anything but that, and drove the people insane as they all began to mutilate each other. The Master, because of his limited travel thanks to the Doctor, which had him suspended from Earth to Utopia, that's the reason how the Master had him and took them all to Earth. Martha saying that he loves the Doctor felt a little unnecessary because this season proved how she was far superior than Rose, although this comment would be better explained in the ending of this finale. Martha's showdown with the Master presents how Martha has been tuning in to the people around the world, the hopeful message of the Doctor, taking advantage of the Master's manipulative Archangel network, which restores the Doctor to his younger age, as the Doctor then reverses the events of this finale to a year before the Master took power, which felt a little cheap but was merely the only way to get out of everything and revert it all back to normal for the next season. This could perhaps be to do RTD's over-ambitious writing for his first parts that don't exactly deliver in their second ones. The Doctor showed nothing but empathy towards the Master regardless of everything he did, despite everyone else recommending they kill him. Shows how the Doctor still considers the Master his responsibility, and even opens up to perhaps settling down to take care of him, although this is put to a halt when the Master is abruptly shot by Lucy. The Master refusing to regenerate despite the Doctor shows that even at death he has one over on him, still presenting this sad competition the Master feels like he has to have with the Doctor, as the Doctor then burns the body of the Master, which was a dark scene that was made even more chilling with the full composition for Gallifrey written and composed by Murray Gold. That before departing reveals to the Doctor and Martha that his nickname when in the Time Agency was the Face of Boar, which was a great twist, making that it was Jack at the end of his eventual life to tell the Doctor of the return of the Master. Martha's departure was bittersweet as she's the first companion of the new series to leave on her own terms because she liked the Doctor but knows that he'll never like her back. So instead of panning after him, she goes, which kind of justifies her initial line said before. The episode ends with its annual Christmas cliffhanger being the Titanic crashing into the TARDIS, which I found to be more of a better use of the cliffhanger as the atmosphere wasn't as depressing as last season. So with all 14 episodes reviewed, where they go in terms of rank, I'm going to go through this quite swiftly. So number 11, The Runaway Bride, number 10, Gridlock, number 9, The Lazarus Experiment, number 8, The Shakespeare Code, number 7, 42, number 6, Daleks in Manhattan and Evolution of the Daleks, number 5, Blink, number 4, Smith and Jones, number 3, Utopia, number 2, Sound of Drums and The Last of the Time Lords, and number 1, Human Nature and the Family of Blood. In conclusion, while Series 3 explores Martha and her character and how she was treated quite badly by the Doctor, who essentially used it as some kind of rebound from Rose, Russell would rectify this when giving her several appearances after her departure, with a short stint in the next season and the second season of Torchwood that would both air in the next year. And there were also plans on having her and Mickey in the third season of Torchwood, though due to filming commitments they couldn't do this. Russell T Davies also re-explored the origins of the Doctor in his home world, and I just love how it's referred to in this series as being something of an ancient legend now.
And that's your spaceship?
It's called the TARDIS. Time and relative dimension in space.
Your spaceship's made of wood. There's not much room, we'd be a bit intimate. But it's just a box. But it's huge! How does it do that? It's wood. It's like a box with that room just crammed in. It's bigger on the inside.
Is it? I noticed.
Ready?
No.
Off we go.
Damn, it's a bit bumpy!
Welcome aboard, Miss Jones!
It's my pleasure, Mr. Smith. see you again this